So the thing that is important now is we've done demand, we've done supply. So we've done the background carefully. And what supply and demand is useful for is when you put supply and demand together and to describe what's going on in the market. And the idea is we describe what's going on in the market by calling it or identifying it as equilibrium. So what do we mean by equilibrium? Well, in everyday language, we mean a kind of balance, don't we? A state of balance. If you say, "Oh, I'm feeling in equilibrium now," it means, you know, you're okay with it, right? I had this very unpleasant experience, but now I'm feeling kind of in equilibrium about it. I mean, maybe that isn't what you'd say, but that's what it implies. Well, so in economics, equilibrium is some state of balance, and in terms of market equilibrium, the balance is between supply and demand. So a market is in equilibrium if the quantity that is being demanded is equal to the quantity that's being supplied. So we talk about the equilibrium price, and the equilibrium price is the price which delivers the situation where the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. So that's what we mean by equilibrium. And so that it is a good way to think about it, the idea of balance. So look, I go to the supermarket to buy my carrots, right? I can get them. You go to the supermarket to buy your carrots, you can get them. Producers and sellers of carrots, they're selling their carrots via the supermarkets or down the Balham High Road or wherever it is. But overall, generally speaking, as an approximation, the quantity demanded by you and me is equal to the quantity that's being supplied. And if it isn't, something gives, right? We'll talk about what gives in a minute. But if we assume that all of these demanders are just balancing all the suppliers, that's what we mean by equilibrium. Okay, as it says in the slide, the price adjusts when the plans don't match. Okay, so we'll come to that. Right, I'm just going to skate over this quickly because I don't want to do the maths. I want to think about what it means. But if you had a demand curve, which was the one that's shown there, so it's mathematical, P is equal to 400 minus 2QD. If you had a supply curve, which was P is equal to 100 plus QS, you could find the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Okay, if the slide does that, we'll just note what the price is. Let's see if I can work it out, just thinking about it quickly. Can I do that in my head? I think if the quantity was 100, then the price would be 200. Okay, so let's just suppose that the price was 200. I think if you put those in, if the price was 200 and the quantity was 100, that would be equilibrium. Okay, don't worry about how I worked it out. I just did it in my head quickly. I hope I got it right. I think I did. So if you wanted to work it out mathematically, that's how you do it. Okay, I'm not going to explain that now because if you're mathematical, you'll be able to do it. If you're not, you won't want to do it like that. Okay, I want to think about it diagrammatically. Okay, so this isn't the example to do with ice cream. This is the example to do with energy drinks. So we're going to go back to that example. Right, so we've got a supply curve, which is the upward sloping line, and a demand curve, which is the downward sloping line. And we're just going to think about different possibilities, different outcomes. The outcome that we're going to say is going to be the prevailing outcome is going to be the third one. But we're just going to think about a couple before we get there. Right. So to start off with, imagine that the price was 2. Okay. So if the price is 2, how much do producers wish to produce and sell? And the answer is they want to produce and sell 5. Okay, you might have to look back at the table to see that, but that's right. If the price were 2, how much is being demanded by you and me, the consumers? And the answer is 3. Okay, so it's clear that the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. So that's not equilibrium. That's a kind of disequilibrium, it would be called. It's what's called an excess supply or surplus. The slide calls it a surplus, but a slightly better way of describing it, it's more economic speak really, is that it's excess supply. Well, what would we expect to happen if there's a surplus of something, if there's too much stuff in the market? What would we expect to happen? We'd expect the price to fall, right? It's not clear how that happens, and we haven't said how it happens, but generally our experience is if something's in a surplus or excess supply, the price tends to go down. Okay, let's leave that for a second. Go to the second possibility. Suppose the price was 1. Well, if the price is 1, then the quantity demanded looks like it's 6. If you look on the demand curve and the price is 1, the quantity demanded is 6. And if you look on the supply curve, the quantity supplied is 3. So in that case, the quantity demanded is more than the quantity supplied. So that's a shortage, right? It's called an excess demand. Excess demand. It's 3, isn't it? 6 minus 3 is 3. So there's a shortage. So because this stuff is so cheap, the demand is outstripping the supply. What would we expect to happen in such a situation? We'd expect the price to rise. We'd expect the price to be bid up. Okay, so that situation when the price is 1, that's not equilibrium either. That's another disequilibrium. It's an excess demand. So if the price does rise, then when does it stop rising? Well, it stops rising at 150, because at 150, the quantity supplied is just equal to the quantity demanded. It's 4. And that's what we mean by equilibrium. Okay, so in our model, we don't mess around with these excess supplies and excess demands. We don't think that's a general state of affairs. We think that the price adjusts. We assume the price adjusts fairly quickly to balance the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded. So the places that we end up in our model are places like the 150, are the equilibrium. So that's how we assume the market behaves. Okay, generally that's what our experience is. The real world is slightly more complicated than this, but this is our way of thinking about things. So we move to the equilibrium. Okay, so that's a very important idea. Again, these things, I'm explaining them quite quickly, and just stop the video and have a think about it. Maybe take a piece of paper, see if you can sketch the supply and demand away from the graph and tell yourself a story about what an excess supply and excess demand is and what an equilibrium is. Okay, that would be a good thing to do. So the slides, I've got ahead of the slides, but you'll see that they're saying more or less what I've said about the price adjusting. Okay, so when it says market forces should push markets from disequilibrium towards equilibrium, they're talking about an adjustment in the price in the way that I described. Okay, so you can read that. So this is basically the idea that underpins Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, when he was talking about the invisible hand. This is the price adjustment, the price mechanism is essentially what he's referring to. Right. Now, I think that there are various things that can happen, and the person who put these slides together is thinking about all the possibilities in one go. But I think that's putting the cart before the horse. So I'm gonna try and take a simple example, and maybe I'll come back to those slides in a minute. Okay, so let's just tell a story that is consistent with the diagram that you can see now. So one where the demand curve looks like it's shifted to the right. Okay, so suppose that there is an advertising campaign that makes energy drinks much more what's the word I'm looking for? Desirable, much more desirable than they were before. Right, so we've all watched the television. We thought, oh, those energy drinks, we must get some of that. Must be drinking those. That's going to shift the demand curve to the right. Okay, so the way that you describe that using supply and demand, you don't have to have numbers. You might have letters to stand for prices, but you would say initially, before the change, the price of energy drinks is 150, and the quantity being transacted, the equilibrium quantity, is 4. Then there's an advertising campaign that shifts the demand for energy drinks, shifts the demand curve to the right. In other words, whatever the price is now, there's more demand for energy drinks. Okay, what's going to be the outcome? The outcome is going to be a new equilibrium where the price is 250 and the quantity is 6. Okay, so it's like two snapshots. The first snapshot was 154, 150 price, quantity 4, and the second snapshot was price 250, quantity 6. Now we might want to say, well, okay, well, how do we get from the first point to the second point? What's happened in between? Okay, so let's think about that. When the demand curve shifts to the right, if the price didn't change, if the price stayed where it was, so the price was 150, suppliers would still be supplying 4. They'd still be supplying 4, but the demand side of the economy, the quantity demand, would now be 8. If you go along from 150 to the new demand curve, the demand curve looks to me like it would be 8. So the demand would be outstripping the supply. Okay, what do we think happens if demand outstrips supply, if there's an excess demand? We think the price is bid up. So the price wouldn't stay at 150, the price would be bid up. And as the price is bid up, so you move along the supply curve and along the demand curve until the gap is closed, until the quantity gap is closed. So the price has risen to 2. Are we in equilibrium? No, we're not, because the demand is 7, the supply is 5. So the price is still rising when it gets to 2. How far does it rise? It rises until you get to 250, because there the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are equal. So that's the new equilibrium price, right? Now, with supply and demand, you always shift the curve and say, we started here, we finished here, and that's what's happened. Okay, that's called static analysis, just saying the beginning and the end. But it's also possible to know what's happened through time. It's like shooting a video through time. And you would describe it in the way that I've done. So I would do it in the order I've done it. Okay, so let's think of other things that might cause the demand curve to shift to the right. We've already analysed them earlier in the lecture, in the first part. So if the price of a substitute was to rise, then people would buy less of the substitute, more of our thing. Demand curve would shift to the right. If the price of a complement were to fall, so something that goes with energy drinks, I don't know what goes with energy drinks, but whatever it is, if that becomes cheaper, we buy more of that thing, we buy more energy drinks. Demand curve would shift to the right. We just did the change in taste, that was advertising. If income goes up and the good is normal, I think energy drinks probably are normal goods. So if people have more income, they spend more of their income on energy drinks, the demand curve would shift to the right. So those sorts of things, okay? So the idea is, what you use this for is you want to identify what the effect of a particular change is, okay? So suppose that, in the industry that I'm in, the demographic changes favorably, so that there are more people who are going to be demanding my product, okay? What effects is that going to have on the market? It's going to shift the demand curve to the right, the price is going to rise, the equilibrium price is going to rise, and the equilibrium quantity is going to rise. Okay, so that's how you use the analysis. You think, what's changed? Does it affect supply and or demand? Let's assume it only affects one. What effect is that going to have on the price and the quantity? Okay, I might have to go back to some earlier slides. But for the moment, I think these are good ones to look at. So let's think about something that shifts supply instead of demand. Okay, so in this case, we need a story that shifts the supply curve to the right. So a fall in costs, that would do it, or a technological advance, or if we expect future prices to fall, so we want to supply now, or if there's a favorable natural factor. So maybe in terms of supply, we've got to think about it in terms of supply. I don't know what natural factor would encourage the supply of energy drinks, but yeah, I can't think of something. But anyway, if it was wheat, it's easier. Sunny summer, supply curves increase to the right. Okay, so whatever it is, the way that you would analyze it is you say, okay, initially we're at 150 as the price and 4 as a quantity. Then this event happens as a technological advance. the supply curve shifts to the right. What's the new equilibrium? The new equilibrium is 1, 6, okay? Price of 1, quantity of 6. So you can see that the key thing is the price has gone down and the quantity has gone up. Okay, so initially you just say, well, this is where we started, 150 and 4. This is where we ended, price of 1, quantity of 6. But if you want some intuition as to why did we move from the first point to the second point? Well, had the price stayed the same as it was originally at 150, when the supply curve shifted to the right, the quantity demanded was still 4. Now the quantity supplied is 8. Is that equilibrium? No, it's not. There's an excess of supply. There's a surplus. What do we think happens to the price when there's a surplus? It falls. So given the excess supply, the price falls, and the gap between the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded shrinks to nothing. So the price is falling. When it gets to 1, then the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded, they're equal to one another again at 6. So that's how you think about it, right? So what you could do as an exercise is try and think of 1 or 2 things, maybe that shift the demand curve to the left or the supply curve to the left, and just get the hang of it, okay? And just go through that kind of the same way I reasoned. Just try that. Okay, let's just go back a couple of slides and see. Okay, so this is just an exhaustive list. This is the sort of thing that I'm too impatient for, but I'm not saying it's not useful. So what could you have? You could have something that increases demand and doesn't affect supply, something that reduces demand and doesn't affect supply, something that increases supply and doesn't affect demand, something that reduces supply and doesn't affect demand. So it's just thinking about the different possible changes. Okay, all right, fair, we'll go with that. And then it says, okay, well, what you should do is, this is useful information, draw a diagram, label the axes. So it's okay after a while just to label them P and Q. Think about the events that you're told that have occurred and decide whether they change supply, demand, both. Okay, which way, and then basically 3 is, do the events that change supply, demand and supply bring an increase or a decrease? Okay, so you just have to decide which way the schedules are going to shift. Draw the new demand and supply curve on the diagram. Find the new equilibrium and compare it with the original one. Okay, so that's what we've done. So the difference between what we've done so far and what you sometimes have to do is sometimes you don't have numbers, but you might call the first price and quantity P1 and Q1, and then after the change, the new price and quantity, you might call them P2 and Q2. So we'll do that in a seminar. So it's not always the case that you have numbers. Sometimes you have to have labels, call things P1 and P2, or Q1 and Q2. And really what you're focusing on is, has the price gone up or down? Has the quantity gone up or down? That's what you want to know. Okay. So this is like a little checklist of if there's a change in something. So suppose, just look at the first column. Suppose there's an increase in demand. Okay, in other words, the demand curve shifts to the right. What will happen to the price and quantity? They'll both go up. Okay, what would happen if there's a decrease in demand? So just looking down the first column again, if there's a decrease in demand, the price will go down, the quantity will go down. So what I would do, as it says, is see if you can come to those conclusions which are in this table when you use a diagram independently. Excuse me. So take a supply and demand diagram and try increasing the demand, increasing the supply. I've got a frog in my throat. Okay. Right, then there's a little exercise which we'll pass on for the time being. Right, if you had both an increase in both supply and demand, then not everything is clear. So if you think about it, if something shifts the demand curve to the right and shifts the supply curve to the right, it's absolutely clear that the new equilibrium will involve a greater quantity. It's definitely true that Q is going to go up, the quantity is going to go up. but actually you can't tell whether the price is going to rise or fall. It depends on how far each schedule shifts and how steep they are. Okay, so again, that's a further point. We're getting a bit more sophisticated now. Don't worry about that for now. Worry about understanding everything I've said before this. I think that's more important. But anyway, that's something for a bit later on. Similarly, if you have, what have we got here? A decrease in demand and an increase in supply. So something that shifts the demand curve to the left and the supply curve to the right. Okay, well, in this case, it's definitely going to be the case that the price is going to fall. The equilibrium price is going to fall. Both those things tend to reduce the price, but it's not certain what will happen to the quantity. Again, this is going on to the next stage. Look at that when you're ready to, but don't worry about it if you haven't mastered the stuff that came before. Worry about that. Okay, so what we've done today, I hope what I've done is I've persuaded you that actually supply and demand has got quite a lot to it, and one needs to be quite methodical